Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. At this time, I would like to introduce our panelists for the presentation. Our Council President, Brad Arbuckle, our Vice President of Enterprise Risk Management, Lori Champion, and our Scout Executive and CEO, Don Shepard. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat feature, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the webinar. If we cannot get to them due to time constraints, we will post them on our website on the michiganscouting.org website. So with that said, I will turn it over to Don Shepard.
All right, thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. So welcome to our webinar. I know that there's been some considerable dialogue and conversation in the field regarding the rollout of our restarting scouting plan. And so what I want to do today is to try to clear up the air of any misconceptions that might be out there and or clear any items that need to be clearly identified, I guess, as we go through this presentation. So if for whatever reason you need to enter a question, please do so. And again, please do that at Safe Scouting at michiganscouting.org or use the chat feature. All right, with that, let's move on, Chris, to the next slide. So our objective today is to keep scouting the scouting program available as an in-person program, accessible and flexible through healthy and safety measures, through a changing health, medical, legal, social, and financial environment. This has been a significant challenge that we've had to meet as an organization working through and with COVID as it relates to state, federal, and local officials, and the organization having to meet a considerable number of demands from these fields of health, social, financial, legal, etc. So we're really working diligently to do that. And Chris, if you can show the next slide. We've had a team of volunteers and professionals working together for a considerable period of time. As you can see on this sheet, as COVID hit, we started to look at all of the initial response phase, if you will, that the CDC and others were putting forward so that we would understand our situation and our risks moving forward as it related to delivering an in-person scouting program, whether they were legal, regulatory, licensing, insurance-related questions. There was a lot of conversation related to how we could return to an in-person scouting program. So we went through March and April looking and studying at a lot of that, a lot of those details, just as you did, glued to various webinars and Zoom meetings in order to stay informed. From April, May, and June, we did a lot of monitoring all of the developments that were occurring throughout this COVID pandemic, and whether that was where the plumes were happening and how things were expanding and where it was rising and where it was falling, and perhaps even in some cases where it was pretty much not impacted. But along that way, we had a bunch of decisions we had to make. One of those was, do we offer a summer camp operation given the things that we knew at the time from the state government and from the CDC? The board made the decision not to run a summer camp program. There is a number of decisions that we had to make. That was just one of them. Sorry about that. And so we built a bunch of draft plans and documents related to how we were going to re-enter the scouting program. And we had to wait on the state regulatory agencies like LARA and like the CDC and like the Department of Health and Human Services and others in order to establish how we were going to have to re-enter and whether the preliminary plans we were putting into place were going to be acceptable. So in phase 3, to return to the in-person scouting program, there were a number of things we had to do. We had to finalize a total plan for relaunch and present it to the board. Once the board digested that and digested what our risks were as a council in order to return, then we began to put things into a pen to paper, if you will, and we began to develop the necessary forms for us to be able to return to scouting. We developed some web and outreach tools. We began to put together webinars, and we continued to stay vigilant in seeking new information as it continues to roll out. It's not like this is over. This is still in process, and as a result, we're continuing to learn more all the time. And we're constantly planning for the risk of a potential second wave, as we've seen little plumes of COVID popping up here and there around the state, not to mention what's going on in states like Florida, Texas, Arizona, etc. All right, Chris, next slide, please. In this slide, this is kind of the primary opening page, if you will, to our website, Michigan Scouting Forward. And there seems to have been a great deal of confusion related to the 5 steps to restarting scouting. So I'm going to attempt to clarify much of this confusion that we continue to hear through the form of telephone calls and or emails sent in to us asking for clarification. So you'll see a yellow box around steps 1, 2, and 3. So restarting scouting plan, the first 2 steps are being asked of all registered adults and families. So step 1 and 2, reading the documents and then looking at and signing the waiver form is imperative for all folks who are involved in scouting, as is filling out the Part A and B annual health and medical record, sometimes called the AHMR. So we really need those 2 documents to be filled out, and we need those documents retained by the unit for all registered members to participate in scouting. Now, we've had a number of questions related to, does a non-registered volunteer or someone attending an event have to fill out a waiver, an adult waiver? And the answer to that is we would like that to occur for things like boards of review or things like Eagle Scout Courts of Honor. But where you can't get that done, then we would like you to have a sign-in sheet that shows who the individual is and how we connect with them in the future should we need to as a result of COVID. Okay, so we will continue to ask you to collect those. And there's also a misunderstanding that we need a copy of all of those. We do not. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But number 1 and 2 are the real critical steps. Number 3 is being asked only of those who meet these restrictions placed by the state of Michigan. So if you have pulmonary issues or you happen to be over the age of 60, then they're calling that a vulnerable class. And we have a resource tool amongst step number 1 in the resources that outlines who qualifies to have to fill out a supplemental medical permission form. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about that medical permission form in just a moment. Step number 4 is only used by committee chairs, Cub Masters, Scout Masters, crew or post advisors if a case of COVID or accident or sickness incident occurs where we have a near miss or something we think could have occurred, and we want to try to prevent it from occurring in the future, these documents have been provided by the Boy Scouts of America. And there's also videos related to number 4 that you can watch online at Scouting Safely, which is the BSA safety site. And you can go to Scouting Safely and it'll walk you through exactly how to fill out by video an incident report and what kind of information goes on there in the case of a COVID incident. So the incident reports are not for everyone, but they are for every unit. And every unit needs to consider who's going to fill those out. And in most cases, it'll either be a committee chair, Cub Master, Scout Master, advisor, or some appointed individual who's going to handle the incident reporting for that particular unit. Now, number 5 has caused people a lot of consternation. Number 5 does not apply to 95% of the scouters, maybe 98% of the scouters in the scouting program. Number 5 is a document called a volunteer services agreement, and that agreement is only council administered. So where individuals who are either volunteering on a summer camp staff or a day camp staff for an extended period of time, or are working with council properties, and when I say council properties, I mean offices or camps, and they're working on a properties committee, for example, and working for an extended period of time, these are the individuals that will be asked by a council level volunteer or a professional to fill out a volunteer services agreement. Number 5 is not for the average unit that's out there. This is a document that is just for and just to be administered by the council in working with specific properties. And there's a lot of reasons for that document. That document actually helps us as it relates to somebody who's with us all the time or somewhat employed by us as a volunteer to be on site frequently through a Michigan only statute related to workers' compensation for volunteers who are doing extensive things like this for nonprofits. And so that's why it's not for everybody. It is only for the group of folks related to council properties and or giving service to things like summer camp staffs or long-term day camp staffs and things of that nature. So that is a summary of steps 1 to 5. I'm going to cover some of these a little bit closer as we move forward. So Chris, next slide, please. So part of number 2 is to fill out a waiver form. And a lot of people have consternation over the waiver form. But the important thing that I want to tell you today is most of the language from the waiver form came directly from 2 documents that you have probably already filled out and signed if you're a registered volunteer with the Boy Scouts of America. When you fill out an adult leader application, on the inside cover, as you can see on the picture here to the right, there is a statement in there that indicates that you are waiving, you're not going to sue the Boy Scouts of America as a result of some of the risk activities that you'll engage in as a member of the program. And so prior to COVID, you have already signed a waiver as such inside of the adult leader application that indicated that you were not going to sue the Boy Scouts of America. Likewise, in Part A of the health form, which we've filled out for years and years, for A and B are required for units to do activities, and A, B, and C are required when you go to summer camp. And when you fill out Part A, there is also in the very first paragraph a sentence there that refers to informed consent, release agreement, and authorization, which also gives release to the Boy Scouts of America, and therefore the Michigan Crossroads Council, from any kind of a lawsuit. Now, volunteers have been asked to fill out parts A and B of this health form for many, many years. And this provides we would need this form, or you would need this form in the unit and have to have it on record in case somebody becomes unconscious, for example, or has an allergic reaction during a meeting, activity, or outing. This provides health status for emergency professionals when they arrive. And likewise, all families should have filled one of these out for their child that's participating in scouting, for all of the very same reasons. So if you're on a unit activity and something happens to a child and they're unconscious, or they have an allergic reaction, etc., you know how to deal with that as a unit leader working with the children. Now, these forms have been around for a long time. So as it relates to the waiver, we haven't really asked anybody to fill out anything in addition to what you have already signed as a member of the Boy Scouts of America through the adult leader application, or as part A of the medical form that everyone's used to go to camp for years and years, or that you should be using as a unit and having on file for all of your registered members, as is outlined on the Scouting Safely website. Every person who's registered in scouting should have an A and B medical form filled out and turned into their unit. And they should update that on an annual basis. Okay, so why am I saying all this information? Because it's not new. People have been doing this for a very long time. Next slide, please. All right, so because we've been doing this for a very long time, we issued the waiver as an opportunity for us to protect our volunteers and chartered partners. The only change is that the waiver addresses our current COVID challenge that is still evolving, and new information is being released weekly. The rest of the information, as I said a moment ago, comes from Part A of the medical form and the adult leader application. So the information that is contained within that waiver shouldn't be information you haven't read before. It parallels all the BSA language. Okay, and in order to respond to the thousands of scouters who are pleading to return to in-person scouting programs and to keep our leaders and charter partners safe, we needed to administer a waiver for their protection. Many are focused on what the waiver does for the Michigan Crossroads Council, and that we're not looking out for you. You are the MCC. We are asking for these forms to be filled out so that we as an organization can protect you as a leader should something arise from COVID. You've already signed the other, and so have all the other members, the other risk information through the A and B medical form and through the application. The predominant thing for this waiver is COVID. So we're looking to be able to provide you as a volunteer coverage as it relates to protecting you should somebody bring some kind of a case before the court related to a COVID case that arises. Now, we're not the only organization that's using these kinds of waivers. I've had several emails that have said, why isn't anybody else doing this? Well, they are. You can look at the YMCA, and we look childlike compared to the waiver that the YMCA has. You can look at the Michigan Youth Athletic Association. If you're listening to me today and you have a child that's going to play in sports this fall, you're going to see the same kind of waiver come to your household for you to sign so that your child can play sports. The list goes on. There are many, many organizations utilizing a waiver because none of us know what the outcome is going to be from COVID, or when a vaccine is going to be available, or when COVID is going to end, and all of those sorts of things. Today it's COVID. Last year we closed cabin rental for 3 months in the fall due to Eastern equine encephalitis, triple E. I don't know how many of you remember that, but triple E was a big deal last fall, and people were getting very sick from mosquitoes. So the county shut down the camping operations at D-Bar A, Rotary, and Cole because those counties were not allowing those outside activities to occur. And before that, it was the Lyme's disease with concerns related to deer ticks. Who knows what's going to be next? None of us do, okay? And so this waiver is simply going to provide coverage so that if something arises now or in the future, that it covers our volunteers and protects them from being sued as a result of people being involved in a program that comes with some risk, particularly when it pertains to participation in the outdoors. So we have inherent risks in the outdoors, and organizationally, they're beyond our control, but we must be prepared for them. All right, next slide, please. There's been a lot of conversation regarding the supplemental medical permission form for vulnerable persons. The state of Michigan recommends that folks over 60 and those with pulmonary conditions not be part of group activities that could provide them with greater exposure and risk of COVID. So I know there's some folks that have said, hey, isn't it discrimination to talk about people over 60, et cetera? I'm just simply stating the facts provided by the state of Michigan. And the state of Michigan tells us as an organization that we need to limit the involvement of people over 60 and those with pulmonary related conditions that might be susceptible to greater risk exposure in the area of COVID. And as a result, this document was simply a method or a way of providing a method for you, if you want to be part of an in-person scouting program and you're in one of these categories that the state has said you should not participate in, to be able to return to in-person scouting. This is a population segment that has been set aside by the CDC and the state government. CDC said 65, state government said 60, and as a result, we have to follow the state government regulation. So we're just simply following the regulations that have been put before us. Okay? Many have asked, why don't you just use Section C of the medical form if we have to see a doctor anyway? Your doctor may be different, but many physicians will allow you to email or drop off the form, and the doctor will call you. You have a dialogue with them, and they will sign it, and you either pick it up or they will send it back to you. And that was really the intent of this particular document. Now, if for some reason your doctor will not sign this document and fill it out on your behalf, then fill out the document, indicate that your doctor refused to sign it, and then maintain it on file with all the rest of your unit paperwork. And for your youth, have a parent fill out the document, and if the doctor won't sign it for a youth, then have the parent sign the document saying they've had the conversation with their child. They understand that there's additional concerns for folks that have been part of this population segment, and that they understand the risks. That is the purpose for this document. It's so those population segments that have been outlined by the state can participate in scouting as we understand it. Okay, next slide, please. As we fill out this paperwork, it would seem very daunting to have to reproduce this paperwork and turn it in every time you turn around. So it's going to be important for us in this process to use this Restart Scouting Unit checklist to confirm that your unit has this paperwork in their possession. So I'm asking you, each time you have a meeting, do a project, have an activity, conduct an event, go on an outing, do a ceremony, all of those things and more, each time you do that, then we need you to use one of these restarting scouting unit checklists to record who was there, and if you have any of the documentation for them that's listed to the right. So if you have a medical waiver, if you have a Part AB medical form, if you have an adult or a youth waiver, at the very least, we want their name. And if for some reason they're not registered in the program, if you could get a good contact telephone number for them, it would be important. Because if after the event, it's identified that somebody had COVID who attended that event, then they'll need to be contacted, and we need to let them know that they've been exposed according to the CDC guidelines. So this document becomes very important. Now, the checklist is the key for admission to the functions you're going to hold, and the top part just simply gathers a little bit of information about your unit and the type of event or activity that it was. You collect the names and the information, and at the bottom, it's a verification that you actually have the documents that are checked and or marked there on this sheet on file. So we don't need you to make copies of the health forms. We don't need your health information. There's a lot of folks that have been concerned that if I fill out a health form and I got to turn it in every time, I'm somehow exposing myself through HIPAA requirements, etc. Well, that's not what HIPAA says. That's not how HIPAA works. However, we're not asking to collect that information. You're going to collect it at a unit level, and all we're asking you for at a unit level is for verification that you have it for the events that you're coming to. So let's say that Unit X decides to come and use a campsite at Camp Y, and you're going to camp for the weekend. When you show up at camp, as you check in, you're going to provide us with a Restart Scouting checklist for your unit, and it's going to verify all the people that are there and the fact that you have the information on file for each one of those people who are in attendance. And that's the only sheet that we will need on our premise in order to admit you into the facility to go have fun. So we're not looking for copies of all of the information, the waiver and all that kind of stuff. We're just looking for a checklist. And each unit needs to do one of these each time you do a meeting, a project, an activity, etc. This becomes your attendance form. And once it's filled out, whether it's filled out by the patrol, whether it's filled out by a den leader, whoever it's filled out by, it just gets turned in to whoever's maintaining your documents, whether that's a unit secretary or the committee chair or whoever's doing that, gets turned in, and you're going to hold on to that document for a period of 1 year. And after a year, it's safe to shred and get rid of the document. Okay? Hopefully, this helps explain what the unit checklist is for and how we at the council and or district activity level or camp intend to collect it, and how we expect you as a unit to utilize it for what you're doing moving forward. It just becomes your attendance roster as you move forward. All right. Next slide, please. We've also had some conversations centered around insurance. People who believe that they're no longer insured or they're giving away all of their insurance rights, etc. That is not true. You are covered with insurance, the same insurance you had before, and there are no changes to the insurance or the insurance coverage. General liability insurance is for registered adult members of the Boy Scouts of America. And this provides you with coverage should somebody decide for whatever reason at all to sue you or to sue your unit for some sort of a negligent situation. Okay? And that general liability insurance does not cover kids because liability insurance is meant for people 18 years of age and older. And so the liability insurance covers our registered adult volunteers. Now, there's a second kind of insurance. It's called health and accident insurance. It's actually called accident and sickness insurance. Okay? And accident and sickness insurance is provided to all members who are registered in the BSA, youth and adult. And that is called secondary insurance. And the secondary insurance is secondary to your personal medical insurance. If for some reason a family does not have medical insurance on their scout outings, they are covered with accident and sickness insurance for each incident that occurs. Okay, and they would be covered within the insurance limits that are provided with the secondary accident and sickness insurance. Okay, so just to be 100% clear, everyone is covered with insurance who is registered. And when it comes to health and accident insurance, or what's called accident and sickness insurance, you as an individual who are registered with the program, or your youth, and if you have a visitor to an event, are covered with this insurance while they're at your event. All right, hopefully that clears things up as to the insurances that are still being covered with no change. Next slide, please. So through all of this, the Michigan Crossroads Council tried to put a one-stop shop together, and it's called michiganscouting.org/MI Scouting Forward. And it's where all of our documentation is located for unit leaders and charter partners to draw their information from. So there are links there that contain all of the documents that I've talked about today. And because this has been an evolving thing, we've been listening to our volunteers, listening to your concerns that you've shared by email and phone call. And so, you know, for example, the checklist is one of those documents that was created in order to simplify not having to turn in a variety of other forms at every event you come to. So those documents can all be found on that location. Under number 1, there are lots of resource documents that are there for your unit that you can print off and share with your families regarding social distancing, how to use a mask properly, how to clean your hands and your utensils and all that kind of stuff properly. So sanitation is on there. There is a variety of 1-pagers or 2-pagers that we've downloaded from the CDC and from the Boy Scouts of America to assist you in running a safe in-person scouting program. And all that is located on this website. In addition, there is the weekly MI Scouter newsletter, which is our Michigan Scouting newsletter. that comes out every week. So as we learn new things from the Licensing and Regulatory Commission, or we learn things from the Department of Health and Human Services, American Camping Association, Boy Scouts of America, the CDC, or the state of Michigan, as we learn new things or we're given instruction as an organization about what we need to do, we will put it out weekly in a newsletter. If it's urgent, we will send it out immediately in an email, or it will also be posted on the Michigan Scouting Forward page of our website. So you can find all that information there, and that's where this one-stop shop was created, and it was created for you. Next slide, please. Okay. So the Restart Scouting Plan to do in-person scouting activities was designed for you. These documents and guidance are here to help you do the right thing. I've actually had some volunteers who have, in speaking of from a position of emotion on the telephone, have said, we're just going to do whatever we want to. And guess what? You can do that. But when you do whatever you want to, and you're not following the guidance of scouting, which is transferred from the guidance provided to us by LARA, Department of Human Services, Boy Scouts of America, all of these other agencies that we're accountable to, you are putting yourself, your families, and your chartering organization at risk. And so we would encourage you and we would implore you to follow the guidelines that have been provided for you to do the in-person scouting activities. So absent this documentation and these forms, we simply do not do in-person scouting until we have a vaccine. And I don't know how long that's going to be, and I don't think any of us on this call know how long that's going to be. So we're doing the very best we can to keep our leaders safe, to protect our charter partners, to protect the Michigan Crossroads Council, which is you, and to make sure that we can conduct in-person scouting as safely as we possibly can, and that I can look a mom or dad in the eyes and say, this organization has done everything that we possibly can to provide the safest environment for your child to participate in an in-scouting program. So we as a council must provide this protection for our unit leaders and charter partners. We do that by the use of these guidelines for restarting scouting. And we look forward to hosting you in the various campsites as your unit returns to the outdoors and an in-person program. We appreciate each and every one of you and the commitment that you've made to scouting and to the youths served through your efforts. And we're simply taking as many precautions as possible for everyone's benefit. Hopefully today we've had an opportunity to answer some of your questions that you have about why we produced these documents and what is going to be required as we move forward. Maybe we've cleared up some of the questions you have related to insurance or related to the waivers and things of that nature. But if not, you can continue to send your questions to safescouting@michiganscouting.org, and we will answer those just as quickly as we can. And then we will put them on our frequently asked questions page, and we will then continue to keep you advised of any changes that are presented to us from the state of Michigan or federal resources governing the COVID virus that we're all involved in. So I want to thank you for that. I noticed we have 31, or now they're continuing to climb here, but we have a number of questions on the chat. I'm going to open the chat. I may take some of these questions, and I may ask some of our panelists to take these questions. So Chris, if you could please open the lines for Lori and Brad, and we'll go from there. Okay, Keith Ash, the waiver includes a photo release. Some of our scouts and parents can't sign the photo release because of safety, and they admit the photo release. These are scouts who have a valid safety concern with publishing their photos. Yes, they can sign a document that indicates that, or put a note on there that says they would prefer not to have their photos released. And we will do our level best to make sure that those children are not in photos that are utilized by the Michigan Crossroads Council.
But that's also something to think about for your unit. So if your unit is taking photos of youth who have omitted the photographic release, you ought to be thinking twice about that too, because it doesn't just apply to the MCC, it applies to all of our members, all of our units. So when you have that scenario, we just need you to be thoughtful about it and to make certain that you are working with the parents' wishes on that point.
All right, so Paul asks, does BSA General Liability Insurance provide legal defense in the event of a volunteer being accused of inappropriate conduct related to YPT? That is correct, it does. And that GLIP coverage is in full effect and would continue to cover all of our volunteers as we move forward in this situation. What protection is provided to the volunteer by BSA's General Liability Insurance as it relates to COVID claims related to injuries or death? So the GLIP insurance is designed to cover COVID, but the insurance company, because to date there hasn't been a lot of what they call case law, there's no real cases that have been argued in court to any great degree at this point. The insurance companies are watching it very closely, and they're probably going to do a little more investigation on those cases than they might on an accidental death case or something of that nature. I don't know, but as far as I know from the Boy Scouts of America, General Liability Insurance coverage does cover COVID-19. What are the exclusions in the BSA General Liability policy? The exclusions are simply related to if somebody blatantly disregards the requirements, if you will, and doesn't follow YPT guidelines, or just tells their unit to do whatever they want to do and doesn't use masks and doesn't try to comply with state guidelines and things of that nature. If you're blatantly negligent, then there could be an exclusion for the BSA GLIP policy. But by and large, it is a negligence policy and is going to likely cover volunteers for all situations. Brad, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, the key for all of this is it's really a risk assessment, and COVID's an interesting risk because you can have asymptomatic people. It's not really clear who's infected or not, but when you get it, it's not good. And so what we're really asking for all of this is for people to take the time and to think it through. So a lot of the questions on the chat ask, well, when are masks mandatory? Do we have to wear them and the like? Our preference would be for you to wear masks. If you listen to the doctors and the public safety folks, a mask is your best protection. Forget about the paperwork, forget about everything else. A mask is your best protection. So we want you to think about it. We want you to, ultimately the safety is going to be on you and how you do it. That then gets into the idea of what's negligent and like. Our hope is with best practices, as what we've outlined here, you will have good insurance coverage because you will have tried in a reasonable fashion to keep people safe. And that's the ultimate goal. How do we promote safety?
The other thing I would say is that, parents know, and so do you, and so do we, that, if you're dealing with Cub Scouts or even if you're dealing with Boy Scouts, the chances that these guys are going to have a mask on 100% of the time is probably not likely, but we need to when we see them not wearing them, we need to remind them they need to put their mask on for the safety of themselves and the safety of the other participants that they're around. And so truthfully, if we're following those guidelines, we will be in okay shape.
I mean, one of the things to think about in terms of camping, gatherings, and the like, in the news in the last 2 days, there's been the stories about the bar in Lansing at Harper's, where a lot of young people who typically aren't at great risk for this congregated, weren't wearing masks, were in close quarters, and there's now 100 cases over that tied to that bar in 1 week of operation. That's the risk. It's invisible, it's silent. We want people to be as safe as they can, because if you let your guard down a little bit, the consequences can be pretty dramatic.
Don, it's Lori. I would like to comment also that in the general liability also refers back to the Guide to Safe Scouting, and it refers back to what are called prohibited activities. And that's something that all leaders should be aware of. This information has been around for a long time. It's on the BSA website. We link to it here in Michigan as well. Things that are included in prohibited activities would be, a lot of it is just obvious, skydiving, shooting at exploding targets, flyboarding, trampolines, things like this. So just be aware that that is also linked to the general liability insurance. Thank you.
Sure. So there's a question here by Scott. Do we need new AB medical forms if they have current ones on file from last year? Are they okay? The answer is yes, they're okay. I would encourage you to have parents review them once a year, because a child who didn't have allergies to bees last year might have allergies to bees this year. It would be a terrible event if we were to find that out when he or she gets stung and we don't have an EpiPen. Yes, I would encourage you to relatively frequently ask the parents if there are any changes to that, and if not, have them initial it and date it, and you're good to go. As a district volunteer, I am the main contact of a district event, not on BSA property. Will the BSA insurance cover me if I am named in a litigation based on the event? The answer to that is yes. Matt, if you are conducting a district event, it's the same thing as saying you're conducting a council event, because the districts are part of the council structure. We are aware that that date is on the calendar. We have approved it. We have approved a budget for it. We have approved a charter document for that event. It is completely on our radar screen, and yes, it will be covered. What is the procedure if a scout shows COVID symptoms on an outing? There is a document that in the resources that talks about this, but you're to segregate that scout immediately and get the parents notified, get the scout off site, and get the scout to medical attention as deemed prudent by his or her parents at that point. And then you're to notify the remaining scouts' families that there may have been some exposure. So that checklist with that contact information on it, and or those health forms with that contact information on it, becomes very important to you. And then subsequently, you need to fill out potentially a near miss incident form until the COVID is confirmed. And if the COVID is confirmed, it becomes a real incident report identifying who had COVID and all the details that are on the incident reporting form. Okay.
And you do need to notify the other parents when that, because again, if a child is showing symptoms at the campout, you should assume that everybody at the campout's been exposed, and now the best practice is they may all need to self-quarantine, because if they don't, they can then spread it even beyond the camping unit. So again, it's one of those things where we want everybody to be educated. We want people to be careful because the progression of the incident, it's a geometric curve. It's not one-on-one. It can, much like, again, the Harper's Bar thing, it got to 100 people in less than a week. That's what we're trying to watch out for and trying to keep people safe because the impact can go very broad very quickly.
Okay, so the next question had to do with the age discrimination for individuals over 60. Dave, I'm just telling you that it's not age discrimination. I'm just simply passing along exactly what's been provided by the state of Michigan. Does Part C of the medical form that scouts fill out still apply for the year, or do they need to fill out new ones per COVID? No, Part C is still valid, and it's valid as you outlined for 1 year from the date of the physical, and after the 1 year, it needs to be renewed. What's the difference between the first version of the waiver and the latest release? Brad, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, so what we did on the waiver and release is we narrowed the scope of the waiver to fine-tune it to COVID and the exposure transmission to COVID at an outing. We changed the insurance paragraph to better explain the BSA's insurance practices and the like. And then we eliminated the waiver of trial by jury. I mean, we went through, we heard the comments of our volunteers, the things that frustrated them. We went around to shape it to make it more palatable to them, still provide protection to the MCC and its volunteers, but make it, in essence, we made it more fine-tuned.
All right. And I believe we also got rid of the indemnification paragraph.
Yes.
All right. How should leaders police the new rules on an outing? Two scouts having a hard time keeping their distance, viewing, visiting parent is not willing to wear a mask, etc. So you just need to do your level best to make sure that the people who are there are following as many of the precautions that the state requires as possible. And if they won't, you can ask them to leave. And if they won't leave, don't create conflict. Just simply make them aware that they'll not be welcome back unless they're willing to comply with the guidelines that you've set forth with your unit and charter partner, just as we have provided to you. Okay. We've already had a couple of incidences where someone has said, I'm not signing the waiver, I'm not wearing a mask, blah, 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 and the charter partner has asked them to leave until they're willing to do it. And so, if it comes to that, I would rather have somebody angry than have 100 more people with COVID and potentially have a death. So we're just asking you as the leaders to do your level best to maintain the guidelines. And if somebody won't, then, make sure they're not sick, make sure of all the things that you have to check on as people are at your meetings or at your events. But make sure for sure you get their name and contact information on a document so that you can have everybody's information should something occur. Just do your best. If all that information is already in my adult app, why the need for a waiver? So the COVID information that is not in your adult app, the risk and injury is in your adult app, but we called out COVID because COVID is very different. No different than EEE was different, no different than many of the things that we're incurring are not currently covered. When we discover something new, sometimes things have to change. And it is the feeling of the board. We had to have additional coverage. And so the waiver is being required to have COVID coverage. All right, so there's another question here, a private question related to If I signed the first waiver, do I have to sign another one? No, you can sign either one of the waivers. They basically say the same thing. Remember, the first waiver has just got information from the adult app and Part A in it. So if you sign it, you're not really essentially signing any more than you already have. So either the original waiver or the updated waiver are perfectly fine.
Right, but so I'll say this as a lawyer, sign the new form of the waiver because that's the program going forward, and toss the old one.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, if you want to go with the first one, that's fine. Don's right. You can do it. But we have modified the document to reflect some of the concerns of the volunteers. It's more finely tuned. It relates better to some of the materials that are in the 5-step program. So I would encourage you to sign the most current version. Again, you don't have to. If you signed the first one, more power to you. But do think about it, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Can a spouse be a witness on a waiver?
Yes.
Okay. Connie asks, if Triple-E and Lyme disease have been worries, why haven't the waivers been created before? Because Triple-E and Lyme disease never became a nationwide or worldwide pandemic, and they were somewhat isolated. Didn't require a waiver. It required action on our part to close some things down. Will these waivers continue into the future once a vaccine is available? That's a great question. Don't have a crystal ball, and until all of that occurs, I'm not sure what the requirements are going to be in the state of Michigan, and as a result, I don't know whether that question is actually answerable right now.
Right. So again, this is part of the idea, much as like we've done here. Everything's evolving, and what we thought was scary yesterday may not be so scary today, but tomorrow there could be something that's even more scary. And so we are monitoring the situation. We are regularly checking with the state and others to make certain that we understand what the concerns are and the like. And so we will continue to communicate and use emails and websites to go forward. But again, it is an evolving situation, and we're going to try to keep things in a spot where we can promote safety and keep things best for our members and the program.
There's a question here, is the over 60 waiver for courts of honor, joint scouting nights, etc.? The answer is no, the over 60 waiver is not. We would like you to collect an adult waiver for things like courts of honor, etc. And if you can't, then simply do as I had instructed in the PowerPoint, and that's get the list of names, phone numbers, contact information of all of those who were present that evening. That can be maintained so that if COVID comes up later, we're able to make connection with those people. All right.
I mean, one of the things, if I can interrupt Don for that, so in these situations where you have a court of honor, and we'll use grandparents, for example, they may not want to sign the forms, may not have to sign the forms, but I would encourage you to follow good practices, which is social distancing and face masks. That's really the key. Our goal is not to exclude parents and grandparents from interaction with their children or the like, or deny them the ability to interact in scouting. But we do want to be safe, and we do want to make certain that we don't inadvertently cause an issue for them. So again, what we're asking you to do is read the materials, be educated, and then conduct your events, conduct the scenarios in a way that produces or better facilitates safety for all. I mean, ultimately the goal is do no harm, and that's tough to do with something like COVID because it's invisible. So just keep that in mind as you go forward with a number of these things.
Okay. Taking a quick note here. 1 second. All right. Somebody said, can you read the last check mark? I know what slide you're talking about. The last check mark said it indicates your unit has all documents in its possession for the members listed should the need for detailed information arise following any said function. So basically it's saying keep the forms after the function in case COVID arises and we have to make contact with folks. Sorry about that check mark bleeding off the sheet. We'll get that fixed. Okay. If we have scouts sleep alone in a tent, then we are breaking youth protection. We teach the buddy system. The policy will confuse the scouts and make them think twice about what we stress and teach. That's actually not true. So the buddy system or youth protection is within eye and ear, ear sound and eyesight. So because tents are so close together, and an individual is sleeping in a tent and they're so close together, you can hear what's going on with that individual in that tent. And in this situation, with COVID being what it is, we've adopted the one person, one tent, which is a very similar practice to what's being adopted for the National Jamboree. So we're following what's going on in the Boy Scouts of America. And unfortunately, that's going to be the policy moving forward. One person, one tent when they go camping until such time as we can make a decision otherwise. David asked, when is wearing a mask required? I think we've answered that. What will be the communication method for district events, camporees? When can they go forward? More information will come out on district events and council related cabin rentals and all that sort of thing in the month of August. So we'll be back in touch with everybody in the month of August to let you know what's going to be allowed this fall. We're still going through all of the related materials from the regulatory agencies and trying to make sure that we're actually able to do it financially and meet all of the cleansing requirements and all the other things that need to be done that are different from a unit going back camping, etc. All right. What was the reasoning for creating the waivers? I think we've covered that. Can units require compliance with best practice in addition to restarting scouting requirements? 1, 2, and 3. Yes, units can require compliance. And one of the things that we said to you guys is you need to talk to your chartered partner, because not only are we giving you guidelines, you are owned by a chartered partner, and your chartered partner might have something more to say about whether or not they're going to allow courts of honor and those sorts of things in their facility or anywhere else for that matter. And so you should have a good, transparent conversation with your chartered partner. Let's see. Will anybody on the checklist be turned away if they have not signed the documents? If you don't have signed documents for folks when you attend our facility, you remember this is a trustworthy organization. We're based on the Scout Oath and Law. And if you tell us you have signed documents, then you have signed documents. But if you don't have signed documents, somebody put in here, well, you'll be allowed to participate at their own risk. You are taking the risk. So there is a chance that you will, there's no question you'll be participating at your own risk if you've told us you have signed documents and you don't. If you tell us you don't have signed documents, those individuals will not be allowed to participate in district and council related functions, period. Because we need to protect everybody who's there, and our interest is in compliance, and in order to comply, this has been the system that's been developed.
And the thing to discuss with somebody who takes that position is to remind them that we're not looking to impose or infringe or impinge people's rights. We're concerned about the health and safety of others. And so if they don't want to comply, the question becomes, why don't you want to comply when you could be putting others at risk? And that's what we're trying to deal with. And the answer may be they'll have to make a choice between what's more important to them with the piece. Again, we're not looking to tell people to do things just because we can. We're looking for people to make educated decisions and act in a rational manner that ensures or facilitates the safety of others and themselves, but primarily others.
Yeah. And that goes along with this question that talks about, do we need waivers for all people attending if we can't obtain one? Is it just for courts of honor and regular meetings as well? I think I've covered this, but I would tell you that if you have a sign-in list for courts of honors and meetings, that's one thing. If you're going on a day-long activity or a weekend camping trip and you've got somebody that won't fill out a waiver, don't let them go. End of story. Don't let them go, because basically these are designed for your protection. And we're just simply trying to protect you. And as Brad just said, if someone's unwilling to cooperate, then they're jeopardizing your protection. All right. Am I right that these forms will be needed for an in-person troop committee meeting? As long as you're filling out these forms anyway as registered members of Scouting, then you will have them on file. And again, whether it's a troop committee meeting or a camp out, we want you to keep a roster of who is in attendance. All right. And by the way, if you're keeping good minutes of your troop committee meetings, you're going to have that attendance list anyway. All right. What is the plan for continuing online activities, especially for those who are unable or uncomfortable participating in person at this time? We are continuing with online activities. We have online day camp going on this summer. We have an online summer camp program called Camp Sorta Like going on this summer. We have, I don't know, something close to 1,000 kids signed up for that already. We will continue to offer virtual programming in addition to in-person programming. And so there'll be a number of activities for those young people to participate in, should they choose not to participate in in-person stuff at this time. All right. What's the best way to store and have on hand this paperwork within the unit? I know a lot of units are just simply keeping a binder, and they're carting the binder along with them if they go on a camping trip or that sort of thing. What we don't want to do is we don't want this to become electronic. So we don't want somebody out there going, hey, I've digitized this product and I want you to fill it out online. That's where we start getting flirtatious with things like HIPAA. It's when electronic documents start existing. So that's why all of this is designed for you to fill out, print out, and give to your unit for hard copy usage.
Right. And another reason we want that to happen is because printing something out, reading it and signing it, it slows people down and it gets them to think. Much of what we're asking to do here is to get people to just slow down and think, and safety's top of mind. That's the goal. And so, to Don's point, avoiding digitizing it, getting it in paper, it's sort of a check and balance that lets us know that people have thought about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and we're prepared.
Okay, we got about a dozen more questions here. We're going to try to break through them, and we appreciate all of you who are willing to hang on and listen. And thank you for joining us today. When are camps going to reopen? That's kind of a wide open question there. We are reopening camps on the 6th of July for campsite camping only with latrine usage. We do not have the ability to reopen cabins as such yet, and we are not reopening the camps this summer for summer camping. But as far as renting a campsite, Those are available to you beginning this summer. Beginning on July 6th, and the actual first weekend is, I think, the 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Yeah, and the key is it's weekend camping, not week-long camping.
Right. And the reason why it's not week-long camping is because we are still licensed in the state of Michigan to run a resident operation. And if we camp outside of the weekends, then we put our license in jeopardy, and we have to fully staff our facility with health officers and all the other people that are required if we start allowing camping outside of the weekends. So the board chose to reopen weekend camping for now and slow roll back into the use of our facilities. Yes, Gerald asked, so if something happens because the attendee fails to comply, we're still covered as leaders. That is correct. You will still be covered as a leader with GLIP coverage and with liability insurance coverage, it's provided you are attempting to do the right thing. There's no number 13 on the volunteer service agreement. Is this a numbering mistake?
It's probably a typo. We'll get it fixed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right. Do I've answered that question? Do we have volunteer? Okay. Do we need to have volunteers even if they are not BSA members fill out medical form and waiver and release on Eagle Scout projects? So if somebody's going to be working on an Eagle Scout project for a day or for a weekend, it only takes them a couple of minutes to fill out the A and B form to say, I'm allergic to bees, I'm whatever. It's not beyond realistic to think that somebody could get smacked on the head with a board and all of a sudden they're knocked out and you have no idea anything about them. And so filling out an A and B medical form and signing an adult waiver is not a lot to ask. And so my answer to you is yes. On any of those outdoor activities, Eagle projects, camping trips, all that kind of thing, if you have non-registered volunteers, they still need to comply. Okay. I was on a national seminar that allowed health forms to be extended until August 31st, 2020, even if the year had passed. Yes, that is true. And that is true this year only. And it's true because there were so many doctors wrapped up in COVID that people could not get their annual physical scheduled. So as a result, the Boy Scouts of America extended all physicals through August 31st, 2020, provided that they were done in 2019. All right, it's a good question. Thanks, Jock. It would be good to put some of the clarification statements about liability insurance and doing our level best made today on the website at the top in an executive summary. Had some of this I heard today been posted at rollout, could have resulted in less frustration at our level. I don't disagree with that. Only thing I can say to you guys is we received, as soon as the governor moved her lips and said that the that the shelter in place had been lifted, within an hour, I'll bet we had 400 telephone calls. Within a day, we had thousands. Everybody wanted to get back to scouting and start doing things immediately, even though when you read the order, the governor had not even asked LARA or the Department of Human Resources to release the information required for us to return. And that didn't happen for almost 10 days. And so we were in a rush to try to get all of that stuff digested and then to create the opportunities for people to get Eagle projects done and all the activities and to go on the summer camping trips and all these things. So some people might say we put the cart before the horse by doing the webinar after the documents. but we had such a cry for getting the documents out and getting back to scouting that we put the documents out, and now we're doing the webinars. And yes, I'm probably regretful that we rushed it to try to meet those demands without doing this webinar first. Trust me, it will never happen again under my
Until the next time.
Till the next time, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, one of the things to think about in terms of the liability insurance and the like, you'll note that in the new waiver, we put in links to the national website that explains the insurance. And you should go to those links and they'll have a pretty good discussion of the insurance. In essence, we will just provide the same description. And then as Lori had indicated previously, wouldn't hurt to go back and look at the Guide to Safe Scouting, because we're supposed to be abiding by that anyway, and it will have some things for you to think about, and it's just good to have a check to say, am I operating in a safe manner? Am I doing what's expected of me as a unit leader?
okay. We have a question on here that's related to the volunteer services agreement, Brad, about can you further explain the 1099 statement?
Yeah, so the 1099 statement comes out of the tax code, and that's something that we've been nicked with occasionally. And this goes back to why the council is administering those agreements, because volunteers in certain situations may be provided benefits, such as staying in a cabin or doing some things that under certain circumstances, the IRS will say to us, you provided a benefit, that's taxable to that person, even though they're a volunteer. And the way that we then report that is we issue the 1099. Shouldn't happen a lot. We're hoping it doesn't happen. But then again, that goes back to what the volunteers are doing for us on an extended basis and the like. And we're just trying to make sure it's arranged so everybody understands the implications about that form. Now, one of the things you should know about that form is we've actually been using that for 2 or 3 years up to this point. We've modified it some to reflect COVID and a couple other things, but this is a concept that's been out there for a while. And again, we're trying to do our best to protect the council and protect the volunteers so we all understand what the relationship is and how it's being viewed, for example, by the IRS.
All right. Right. I get a lot of these have been answered. Thank you for the opportunity to learn more.
So, Don, you might want to talk about the one in terms of selling popcorn. We are looking at that process now, and we're developing ways to facilitate show and sell popcorn in a safe manner in light of COVID.
Right. Okay, so Mara says, when will we have electronic documents? These are used all the time in the past years in the medical field and are HIPAA approved. That's true, they are, provided you're a medical provider and or are using someone who has been approved. So we, this year, for summer camp, we're scheduled to use Camp Doc. And Camp Doc was going to handle all of our physical forms. And for the first time, we were going to have them available electronically. Obviously, you know what happened to camp this summer. As we move forward between now and next summer, we're going to work directly with Camp Doc, who is an independent vendor, to see what we can do about digitizing some of these forms, because they are able to handle them, follow the HIPAA requirements, and be in a secure environment. I don't know what the cost is related to that, so we're going to have to explore that, Mara, as we move forward with that particular vendor who is now handling our electronic document for medical stuff anyway. All right. So Rich asks, can a volunteer also provide paid services to MCC and also be a part-time employee such as a wrangler? Can a volunteer also provide paid services to MCC?
Right, so the answer to that is, depending on what the level is, you're going to need approvals. But yes, there are volunteers for negotiated services that are paid a negotiated sum on a negotiated contract. When a volunteer is a part-time employee, that person has gone through our hiring process and filled out employee forms. And so if they're acting as a part-time wrangler and are an employee in that capacity, they are no longer a volunteer. So, you know, they may do other things for us, but again, when we have these scenarios, we're going to want to ask, what exactly is everybody doing and why? Because now you're talking about scenarios where somebody is wearing multiple hats. That raises some very different legal and insurance questions, and we want to make sure we get it right.
Okay. Connie asks, my understanding is licensing is required for more than 5 days and a 14-day period. It also has to do with the Boy Scouts of America, Connie, that if we allow camping for more than 72 hours at a time, it's a resident operation and requires NCAP visitation and BSA licensing and approval as well. So this is as much a BSA requirement as it is our summer camping requirement. So we are limiting our stays to Friday to Sunday. Will scouts be allowed to go into the lakes at the camps with their campsite rental? So initially the answer was no, but since we initially put that out, there has been some changes in how they believe COVID is transferred, and it's not as proven that it's transferred waterborne. And so my understanding on that is going to be, and I need to get with the Outdoor Adventures folks, but you know, if a unit is certified in safe swim defense and safety afloat, and they know how to conduct a swimming exercise, and they're willing to comply with the regulations, I don't see a reason why a unit could not do a swim at the camp, provided they have those certifications.
Right, but you will need to follow the Guide to Safe Scouting, and as Don pointed out, the swim defense pieces, because we probably will not be providing lifeguards.
We will not be providing lifeguards. Yeah. And we will not be opening the waterfront. So if you're going to swim, that's one thing. But just because the boats are stored there doesn't mean it's time to go boating. Because we are then considered offering program activities, and then the state gets a little excited. But you going fishing or swimming is something completely different. Let's see, do merit badge counselors have to fill out these forms? Merit badge counselors are typically doing online things today, and or when they get back to doing counseling with the kids, we're going to ask them to fill out an adult waiver form and turn it into their unit. No real purpose for them to have an AB medical form, but we do want an adult waiver form. And they would turn them into the unit that they're associated with, or they could turn them into the council, either one, and we'll be happy to hold them. All right, it's a good question. I saw a picture that shows scouts using face shields when selling popcorn. Are shields going to be required as well as masks? So we're looking at all that. I think Brad just covered that. We're looking at shields for storefronts. So it'd be very similar to being behind plexiglass. And so more to come on that as our popcorn team unveils their requirements for show and sells. All right. Are volunteers clearing the Rifle River on MCC property covered by insurance? The answer to that question is, if a volunteer is clearing the river for the Boy Scouts, which they are, and they are covered by accident insurance while doing that for us. Waiver of jury trial has always been part of our, waiver of jury trial always been part of our application process?
So the answer to that one is, it's not been part of the Boy Scout process. It is fairly typical in the waivers, releases, and the like of other nonprofit organizations. And part of the questions and the comments that we received, that clause has been deleted from the current version of the waivers.
Okay. As we move toward colder months, assume that we have further guidance on using cabins. It's the Cubby's primary camping experience. Understood. We're looking at it very closely. It's our intention to provide it beginning in the fall, but that decision has not been made by the board yet because we still have a cleaning and recovery plan to present to them in order to show what it's going to cost us and approximately what kind of time it's going to take and who's going to have to do it. So we've got a few things to work out now that we're getting units back to scouting, and then we'll have some information on that in August, as I said earlier. All right. So if you have other questions at this point, I would like you to send them to the address that we provided you, which is safescouting@michiganscouting.org. Again, we'll continue to answer these, and we will put them on the FAQ as we move forward. Again, I hope this has been helpful for all of you. Appreciate all of you who stuck around to hear all the answers, particularly the presentation. And, we wish you all safe scouting and look forward to seeing you on the scouting trail. Have a great day.